Hello there. Good evening, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. Hopefully everything's working okay and you can hear and see me. I can see that a few people are joining us, so I'll just give it a couple of minutes because we've got a few questions coming in already, which is brilliant. So I do hope that video that you've just seen was helpful. My name is Zoe. I'm a transitional wellbeing advisor from the transitional wellbeing team at the University of Lincoln, and we form part of the student wellbeing team there. We've got a few questions in. I'll try and answer them both from within the University of Lincoln response and sort of general, so that any institution that your child may be going on to. So the first question we've got through is, what should I do if my child gets homesick and wants to come home within the first month? Well, this is really common, and it's something that we see often within the student wellbeing team, and we work really closely with students. We would encourage you to encourage your child to get in touch with whatever support services are there and available within the university that they're attending. Certainly for us, we hold what we call fresh start sessions, and we do those within the first couple of weeks of term, very early on, because we recognise that this is quite common for students. So our fresh start sessions talk about homesickness, how it's very normal, ways in which they can manage this, things that might help, and we talk about transition as well and different things to help them manage with the changes that are all happening when folks sort of first arrive at university. So do encourage them to reach out to the support teams, because there's likely to be lots available to them, lots of help and support. We have drop-in sessions, wellbeing advisors available who are always there to support your child. What should I be sending with my student to ensure they have the very best start, i.e. bits from home and keepsakes? Absolutely. So encourage them to bring with them anything that's going to help with that transition and help ease that homesickness. One of the things we talk about is making that space their own, making it as comfortable as possible, making it feel as homely as possible, so that, you know, it's not a cold, stark room. It feels like theirs when they're started and when they're here. So any bits from home are going to help. Do check though with whichever accommodation that they're going into, to see what they might not have to buy. There might be some things already available, certainly within the kitchen areas, things like that, that are already provided that they may not have to buy. So have a check, because there may be some things you might not have to bring, but certainly anything that's going to make them feel comfortable, anything to make it homely, throws, rugs, you know, things like that, because they're just very basic, these rooms, to start off with. So all our students put lights up, you know, pictures from home, anything like that, and that will help ease that homesickness as well. Will I be able to stay overnight at my child's accommodation if necessary? So this can be hugely different depending on where your child may be staying. So accommodation's very different in different places, you know. I mean, certainly if there was space, I would say it's probably okay. It would depend on the room, the style of room, who they're sharing with, of course, because there are obviously going to be other students within that accommodation. They may have shared kitchen areas, they may have shared bathrooms, some of these students. So if it was a crisis and an emergency, it may be a possibility, but it's unlikely really that you'd be able to stay overnight at your child's accommodation. Like I say, it would be dependent on situation and where they're staying. If they're in a sort of studio-based apartment and everything's very private and their own, it's perhaps been more likely, but unlikely ordinarily, I would say. But certainly get in touch with the accommodation team, find out that sort of information if that was to be a likelihood or something that you might want to do. Another question we've got through here: there's been a lot in the press about student mental health at university. Is there anything you can say to parents and carers to reassure them about support available? All we can say is there's lots available within our institution. Certainly at the University of Lincoln, we have a student wellbeing team made up of wellbeing and mental health advisors. We help and support students right the way through. So really not only through their time during their course or the 3 or 4 years they may be studying, but we help in the early stages as well. So from when they may apply through their UCAS application, certainly if they have a diagnosis or condition they may need support with, that information is passed to us as a wellbeing team so that we can make contact in good time. We have the transitional wellbeing team here at the university so that folks can ask us questions at any point if they may need help or reassurance or have queries about what lies ahead. So we hope to help students, ease them into that student life and the changes that lie ahead. But if they do need help whilst they're here, there is lots available. So just really to offer that reassurance to parents and carers that there are teams here, the support available. We can make referrals out into local teams within the local area who we work really closely with. We have dedicated counsellors here available within the student wellbeing team. So lots that we can do to help reassure, support and guide your child through their university studies should they need anything whilst they're here. So that is likely to be the same whichever institution they go to. Most institutions within the UK will have a student wellbeing team, student services team, and support available as part of that. Another question that we've had through: what is the university's stance or policy if my child is being bullied or receiving hate from their colleagues? Well, we have within the University of Lincoln an anti-bullying and anti-harassment policy, and we're really quite vigilant with that, and we encourage anybody to sort of disclose, talk to us, and get in touch with the team should they be experiencing anything like that, because there's due process in place. We would take things very, very seriously. Our student support team are there to talk to students in circumstances such as if they can offer mediation or take, you know, a stance or take necessary action if needs be. You know, if it needs to follow that policy, then obviously we would step through, see what needs to happen with that student, and be mindful of that process. So that we take things really seriously with regards to bullying and harassment. There is a dedicated policy at the university and specialist teams that will work with students should they need that support as well. Another one, bear with me because I'm splitting my screen here, so I'm answering the questions as showing, and I'm talking to you as well. Is there mental health professionals at the university, or would my child need to access professionals via their GP? Well, as mentioned previously, we have a dedicated team at the university made up of not only wellbeing and mental health advisors, but also fully trained counsellors as well. So they can offer sessions of talking therapy. We work quite closely with teams within the local community as well. So should it be a referral, if it's quite specialist support or specialist therapy that a student may need, we can help make that referral and help guide that process. So it's a bit more of a seamless process to refer students out into that local community support if necessary. Our mental health advisors have a lot of experience and previously through the NHS. They've worked in different teams, crisis teams, so they have a lot of a wealth of experience already that we've built up within the team. And that certainly helps to have that broad experience within our wellbeing and mental health advisors so that we can offer that support. So yes, we do have mental health professionals within our team, and we work quite closely out with specialist teams in the local area as well. So students don't always have to access their GP. They may need to, of course, if it is a diagnosis, so something like that. Huge apologies if you can hear my dog barking. So should a student require a diagnosis or they're querying that, we cannot make that. That's something obviously we cannot make. We would need to refer to the GP, but we have quite close contact with our local GP, the one on campus, University Health Centre and GP. So we can work alongside students in that way. They don't always need to access support through a professional like the GP. There's lots that we can do in-house within the student wellbeing team as well. So just another one coming through. What happens to my child's university place or course if they have to take time off due to mental health issues? We work very individually with each student. It would obviously depend on what difficulties that student may be facing at the time, whether it might need to have some consideration. We always liaise with academics within the university. So should a student disclose a diagnosis to us, we work with that student to create what we call a personal academic study support or PASS plan. That is then sent confidentially to the school office for their degree, so that any academic who teaches them has that information should they need it. So academics will have some understanding, some quiet understanding of some difficulties that a student may experience and ways in which they can help them through their academic studies as well. Should a student have to take time off, which obviously work within the wellbeing team and the academic team as well to support that student as much as possible. If it's a considerable amount of time off, then of course the student, we would work with the student, have a discussion about whether they wanted to defer and then just return the following year when they feel able to do so. So there's always lots of options available to the students. That place would still be there, would still reassure that student, and it would just work with them to say, hey, what is the best for you right now about your, you know, your ability to do the course? What do you want to do? And obviously we're guided by them and we'd have that conversation and then look at that. So their place and course would still be there. It's just, you know, what can we do to help them in that moment? Should we look at deferment, or can we have a conversation and can they pick the work back up when they're able to within that semester or whatever it might be? Is there safeguarding in place if my child is showing issues such as alcohol, drugs, money, for example? Would a tutor or someone be there to push them to speak to the right people? So we do a lot of work with our academics here, particularly at the University of Lincoln, with regards personal tutoring systems. So most students on most courses here would have a personal tutor. They have this dedicated training to know where to sort of signpost and where to refer students to if they did have concerns. So if there is a concern for welfare, if a student is in crisis and they have, an academic has in particular, a concern for that student's individual welfare, they would contact us, the wellbeing team, and we can make contact then with that student, you know. So in certain situations, dependent on the crisis, of course, if it was a true crisis and there was a concern for that student's welfare, the welfare of others and their safety, then obviously we would intervene, we would get in touch. But you know, there are and there are policies in place for drugs and alcohol. We work with any student who may be experiencing difficulties with those sorts of situations, money issues, anything like that. So there's dedicated teams to help with all of those individual circumstances, and our academics are very well trained to be able to signpost, and quite quickly as well. So should they recognise anything or have a concern about a student, they would encourage them to talk to us themselves, because obviously it's nice if the student can do that and approach us as a service themselves, or often the academics pick up the phone and just have a chat, just to be guided what's best for the student, how can we help them, and then we work collaboratively in order to do that. There's another question coming through here. Do you provide a checklist of items they will need to bring to uni? Well, we don't as a wellbeing team, but I know that there's often a lot of information dependent on where folks might be moving in, you know, so that again would be what's already currently available at that accommodation, and what might be a consideration for the students to buy themselves, certainly with kitchen utensils and equipment. They may need some specialist items on their course, dependent on what type of course they are going to be studying. If there's a lot of lab work, you know, if it's one of the science-based courses, there may be particular things they're going to have to consider that will be needed, uniform, etc., or the arts-based courses. But ordinarily that information is given from the student, from the school office for that degree. So they would be given reading list, items that they would need to consider to bring, things like that. Anything else is very individual to the student. Like we'd mentioned earlier, you know, anything that's really going to make their space a bit more homely, anything that's going to help to ease that process when they come into university. This transition is so huge for students, and it's something that we really recognise, that, you know, the transition from further education into higher education is a big jump, you know, particularly this year. We've found, of course, this year's been very different. People have been finishing the year very differently, finishing their studies, their sixth form, their college, in a very different way than they might have been expecting. So, you know, things that they want to bring with it, anything that they can help to ease that transition, to remind them of home, things like that, little bits, little items, bring those with them, whatever they might need. But perhaps don't bring too, we often see students bringing way too much and it won't fit into their room. So be mindful, size of your room, you know, what you've got and what you might need to sort of store away, and just be mindful of all those things. But anything course related, anything university related, they would be given information about that as well, directly by their course. Just another one coming through here. If my child is at risk of depression or self-harm, are they checked on regularly? How can I make sure they are safe? Well, this is something that's very important to us, about if a student has an existing diagnosis as well. So if they already have, you know, a diagnosis of depression, if we've had that contact with them beforehand, and if they may have self-harm in the past or anything like that, and that might be a sort of a difficulty for them, or a trait or something like that, then obviously we would know that about that student. Every student that we work with is linked in with a dedicated wellbeing advisor, so somebody to keep in touch with. They wouldn't be checked on in that way, like a weekly check, hey, how are you doing, things like that. It may be that they're encouraged to have an appointment, get in touch in that way. We have residential wardens in all university accommodation, so if anybody is ever worried or concerned about a student in that way, of course they can reach out. There's ways in which they will, you know, be sort of supported at university. If a parent or carer has concerns about their child and they wanted that sort of check-in to take place, we can, it's really difficult for us as an institution. Obviously, as soon as a child, a student enrolls, they're over 18 and they formally enroll at the university, we cannot legally share anything about that individual unless they would sign a parental consent form. So often students choose to do that. If they did that, that means that if their parent would ring up and wanted to ask a question, or they were concerned, we would obviously be able to check in. if a parent hadn't been in touch with their child for a while, and that was really unusual and they were really concerned, obviously if they rang in and it was a concern for welfare, then we'll be able to liaise. We may be able to look into that further, of course. We do recognize that, you know, sometimes, you know, self-harm is a coping mechanism. It might be a way that a student is coping with a certain situation, and then we'd try and work with that student on what's happening for you that's meaning that you're coping in that way. So this is what our team would do, you know, look at strategies to help support that student. Is there more specialist teams that we can link you to that can help you through that situation? So, you know, if there is a risk in that way, and there's something that might happen, and it's happened certainly before the child comes to university, and that might be something that's good and important, or they might be working with specialist teams even before they arrive at university, we would hopefully have had that conversation prior to them enrolling, so that we can look at a risk plan, we can look at the support that we've got available, and know that actually this student is going to need some very dedicated support, and that we can offer that to them when they're here and studying. Just bear with me because I'm trying to zip through. So who can parents and carers go to at a university if they have worries about their young person? Again, so I just covered this just now, and it's really, really difficult. So if you are concerned about your child or your young person, if they haven't signed that parental consent, legally we cannot even share if you rang up over the phone if they were actually studying here and at university here. It's really difficult for us, and as a specialist support team it's really hard to have that conversation, because of course we want to offer reassurance. That's what we do. We're a support team. We want to help, we want to offer reassurance. Legally we cannot do so unless your child has signed a parental consent form. So certainly for us as an institution, that is a policy, that's due process that we have to follow. If you had concerns, we would do all we can to try and offer you that reassurance, but also encourage your child to get in touch with us as a team. So hopefully if you're having that contact, you will be able to push them into our direction, and we would do all that we can. Or if you know that your child has needed support in the past, and it's likely that they may need specialist support at university, we would have that conversation about a parental consent form, so that we can then offer that reassurance should that parent call up. So it's very specific to each individual, but we would always do as much as we can to offer that reassurance. It's just, it is very different from college or from school or sixth form in that way, the type of support or the type of information we may be able to share. Another one here about, are the therapy and counselling sessions you mentioned free, and is there a maximum usage, so 12 hours for free from the university? They are free. Any support that we offer through the student wellbeing team, certainly through our dedicated counselling team, the one-to-one talking therapies, those are free. We are time limited though. We can only offer a maximum of 6 sessions, 6-hour-long sessions per academic year per student. So we do offer the student an assessment, an initial drop-in counselling assessment, so that the counsellor can, you know, sort of consider each individual situation, each student individually, and then look at, is 6 going to be suitable for you? Is that going to be workable and of most benefit to you? Or shall we liaise with the specialist teams that we might have access to in the area? There are other teams that we work with, other teams that students can self-refer to, the local Steps to Change NHS team as well. So there are more options available to students should longer term therapy be more appropriate. But yes, the sessions that we offer are free. We offer 6 sessions, 6-hour-long sessions per academic year per student. Another one here, if my child doesn't tell me that they are struggling, but they are receiving support from the university, at what point will I be notified of my child's mental health issues? I appreciate it, we're confidential, but if my child is high risk, will contact be made with parents and carers? If, like we'd said before, if your child was at risk to themselves or to others, then we would be able to liaise with parents. You know, each situation is very specific and very different, so it couldn't be just across the board that this would be the case. We have very specialist teams who are very familiar with working with people in crisis, people, you know, with very challenging and difficult situations that they experience, very challenging mental health difficulties. So, you know, we would take all considerations into place, but we wouldn't ordinarily contact, you know, if they'd been in contact, we wouldn't contact parents or family if they'd been in contact with a mental health advisor, or they were having counselling, or they were having support in that way. if they were in crisis, if something had happened that would alert us to that, then that would be very different. So each case would be looked at differently. It is very confidential. It's confidential to the student, and sometimes the student doesn't want us to, and if they're over 18 and they're making that decision and that choice, we have to respect that. But each case is looked at individually, like I say, and we've got very specialist staff that work with us that are very familiar with knowing when to make that call. Actually, this is really serious, we do need to reach out, and we perhaps need to get family involved. So it would be I can't say across the board, we do look at each case very individually, but obviously if your child is considered a high risk, it's a crisis situation, they're at risk to themselves or others, then that would be considered. Lovely. Okay, thank you ever so much, everyone. All right, take care. If there's any more questions at all, I will of course answer them by email, because I'll still get those through. Thanks. Good night.